Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for tuning into our webinar. I'm Fergus Dolan from NALA, and I'm joined by my colleagues Helen Ryan from NALA and Tony Daly from 80/20 Educating and Acting for a Better World. The title of the webinar is Clued In, Building Our Critical Thinking Skills to Improve Our Media and Digital Literacy. So I'm going to hand you over in a minute to Helen and Tony, but just before I do, for anyone who's just logged in the last minute or two, for the questions, Helen and Tony will take questions at the end, and you can write your question in the questions box. So in your toolbar, down near the bottom, there's a questions box. If you click on that, you can write in your questions. If you can't see your toolbar, press the orange square with the white arrow and press that, and that'll open out your toolbar onto your screen a little bit. If your questions box isn't working, beside your name, you should have a hand symbol. So if you click on that hand symbol, I should see it, and then I can unmute you and you can ask the question that way. But I'll hand you over to Tony now, and good luck, Tony.
Great, thank you, Fergus. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Time is precious, and doing the graveyard shift after lunch can't be an easy one, but we shall persevere. Thanks for joining us. And as you can see, the topic that we're interested in exploring today is on the topic of media and digital literacy, and in particular, critical thinking skills around it. In terms of lots of the reasons why we wanted to do this particular session, it's part of a longer piece of work that we've been doing with NALA, and I've been working with Helen for some time on around as you can see, working together on a project looking to explore how literacy tutors and practitioners can support learners to enhance their critical thinking, media and digital citizenship skills. And this is part of a piece of training and a training pack that we're putting together, which I have to say is being adjusted based on the politics, based on the experiences and the challenges that not only us, but that learners and tutors and teachers are encountering even in the last few months. We've been doing this for the best part of over a year. So this is coming down the track to support educators more directly on it. So the Tutor's Guide should be ready for September. And as you can see, it's part supported by Irish Aid from a global citizenship perspective and digital media literacy combining together to navigate the question, figure it out as we go along, but also have very strong anchors with which to engage these issues on. And that's part of what we're offering, and we're looking to open up. As Fergus has said, we're very open to taking questions, comments, views on it, because this today's session is part of a listening exercise for us in terms of the things that and the priorities and the challenges people are encountering. Yeah, without further ado, the first slide that's up there is, what is a digital citizen? Is it having a phone or an iPad? Is it engaging on, clicking? Does clicking just make you a digital citizen? We've heard words before like clicktivism and activism by clicking. But digital citizenship is an interesting question that we know the phrasing is used quite a bit. For us, we wanted to at least draw attention to the potential of a definition that's in a draft definition of global digital citizen. As you can see on screen there, it's prepared a bit like what you'd find in a dictionary definition. So someone who develops the skills and knowledge to effectively use the internet and other information technology as part of fostering community, especially in order to participate responsibly. So it's about digital engagement and to what end. So it's not simply a case of clicking, but thinking about and reflecting on, well, where is this going, or what am I doing with this? So that act of considering before you click or is important, or having an awareness. So the project that we're involved in is encountering, exploring, opening up some of that thinking of the definition and what that might mean, because it is a learning exercise, and we understand we learn as we go along, as individuals, as people, as communities, as a learning group. So it's about opening up that disposition to encounter it and strengthen our educational context by constantly testing and learning around something like a definition like this. In terms of possibly, we could have put up a slide like this. We could have put up an image about social media, democracy, and fake news in order to get attention to, to engage on the question of, well, what's going on? We hear the words quite a lot. And we know that platforms exist for different purposes. They're called social media, but does that mean that they're all social? Is social necessarily a positive thing in this context? As you can see, The Economist a number of years ago questioned some of that, which is an economics magazine, a very well-known one, but great image, even just to spark debate. I think in terms of the social media and different kinds of social media platforms, an example of reasons why we're doing this work is, as an example, is the previous slide. You can see here, based on just last summer, which feels like a long time ago now, when the Amazon was on fire, that politicians, in this case Emmanuel Macron, had shared from France, he's the French president, had shared an image which was not taken last summer, but was from a previous time in the Amazon, but it was shared on. This onward sharing of something you see without looking at where it came from is a practice that I think we're kind of familiar with, but being able to slow it down is important and look at examples like this. So as part of certainly your own practice, I would suggest having yourself a folder and saving interesting things for exploring like this. There's one example. Another example would be from the presidential candidate who became the presidential candidate back in 2012, the current president of the United States, around the question of climate change and where it came from. Being able to look at things that are produced online and being able to look at them, slow them down and question what language is in there, what informs it, what is giving it merit are important. So certainly from a context of exploring digital media literacy, it is about literacy on unpacking things like this and deconstructing them, the words, the tones, the suggestions, the things that the facts that may have been used. Are there any facts even to ask that question? Is important. And not being shy to introducing some of these to explore the different avenues from a literacy perspective are important, even as a learning exercise. So there's various reasons why we need to stay on top of or develop a sensibility and a disposition for engaging on critical media literacy on even a number of tweets. There's memes, there's videos, there's lots of other things. But for us, in the last number of years, we've seen it as almost like a training in the classics of media literacy. So lots of words are used today around misinformation, disinformation, fake news, and so on. But we actually think when you're grounded in good media literacy, it means you're capable of engaging on any number of these kinds of materials. So that's what we wanted to, very largely, we wanted people to get and have access to, was certainly that thinking, and growing that as time goes on. So this is a taster session around a broader piece that engages on that question. Something that is useful in some of the ideas that I've already mentioned is from a Finnish fact-checking outfit called FactBar Edu. And what they have done is they have distilled in a very helpful way for those involved in education some of the terminology that is being used, and this stop sign system or traffic light system. As you can see, there's defective information or mistakes is that's the term that goes with that is misinformation. So it's about mistakes and misinformation. Disinformation being it's deceptive information or hoaxes. So it's deceptive in its creation. And again, there's interesting symbols there to support engaging with that. And malinformation is damaging information or gossip. Being able to label certain kinds of information or certain things you encounter. I say information, that information could be visual. It's not just textual. this is helpful as a tool to put it under the lens of one of these and ask questions about it, so as to develop a sense of which camp it might fit into. You know, an interesting activity which could go with something like this is, if you were to look at a headline from a website, you could engage a group and ask them to look at a normal headline. This one is from the journal.ie earlier today, and ask, how could you make it more aligning it with, you know, to make it, turn it into misinformation, or turn it into disinformation, or turn it into malinformation? What might you change in the headline to convert it into one of those areas? An activity like that is great in the sense that it's about exploring how things are made. And in order to, once you go through the practice of understanding how it's made, you're able to deconstruct it as well. So just as an exercise in playing with text, changing, putting words in, taking things out, it's helpful in the sense that there's a learning curve to understand and see how those things are produced in order to be able to critically engage with it further. This is you know, again, we're exploring this in the context of, in an educational context, to, you know, breaking it down. In terms of the question of how it's made, we've been looking at, and this is just one example of as well, of social media, and knowing when we're engaging on social media itself, what do we put online, how is it used, who uses it, and to what degree are we active in it, or are we passive? How are things that we enter in, you know, what's the footprint of where it ends up, and do we have control over that? Again, this is an exercise in knowing, and this is helpful in the sense that being able to explore any number of these avenues, you'll be able to see them on screen, is about the events, you know, your timeline is used, your messages and so on. They are used as part of a company product, and is that serving a purpose that I'm aware of? So for me, knowing is actually quite important, and how it's made, again, allows you to deconstruct, to reconstruct a comfort zone, a way of engaging, and ultimately this idea of producing. So practice on any number of these elements is important. I say that because you know, media literacy itself is not merely about reading of things, it's actually about the production of things. When we put posts up, we're producing. When we create an image of some kind, whether it's a poster and so on, we are producing as well. But media literacy is actually about understanding as well as producing. And it's this production side of producing ethically, considering, and so on is a dimension that's quite important, and allowing us to explore that possibility with learners as well is great. As an exercise, a question we like to ask as well is you can see from the current graphic. I would have asked the question and then showed it to you, but this is from the Oxford Internet Institute, which are brilliant in terms of information graphics, geographical information graphics. They're great at that. You can see in terms of the distribution of knowledge, where things are produced. This is one example about Wikipedia. And if you ask the question, who's more likely to have written a post on Wikipedia about Nelson Mandela, or Arundhati Roy, for example, from India, if you're to ask who would have written a post about them or about their backstory, you're more likely to see from an image like this that the producer may have come from Holland or Ireland or the UK sooner than they may have come from South Africa or India, based on how many people produce things. So this sense of production is interesting to look at, because all things online are not equal, and the production of information is not equal either. So again, a critical sense of how things are produced, where are they produced, is something to encounter and explore. And again, it's about the critical questions. So yeah, just that's the part from my side in terms of a general introduction, and I'll pass you over to Helen now, who's going to take you on from here. Thanks.
Now, that's brilliant, Tony, and I have to share my camera now. Brilliant. We're all learning our new technology here now, and did you hand over to me? Great, show my screen. Brilliant, and I'm going to go from Excellent, great. Thank you, Tony. That was a very interesting opener, and I hope people will find a few more slides now that I'm going to look at. So one thing I suppose we're conscious of, all of us are, and Tony mentioned there, we're all learning about this new media and digital world and navigating our way around it. And there's an awful lot of language around that. So we've been looking lately around, and particularly in the pack as well, around what do these words mean. So again, when we're working, and particularly around the idea of what is a fact, what is information, then you've got an opinion, you've got this great two other terms, then the disinformation and the misinformation piece. And often everything that's not seen as true is lumped in this term called fake news. And it's actually quite a contested term. So the EU and other organisations would say things like, and it did come from the whole Trump era too, that really we shouldn't be calling it fake news, and that it would be much better to use the word disinformation, again, which is false information that is put out intentionally to cause harm or confusion amongst people. So I think it is important to look at some of the terms, and certainly in the book that myself and Tony are working on, we'll be defining and having a glossary of terms, because there's an awful lot out there for us to try and understand. Then what we were looking at then after that was, sorry, now moving on, is why do we need critical thinking? So again, we were linking the critical thinking piece with our media and digital literacy. And really, we need it because there's an awful lot out there for us all to take in. I mean, I don't know about other people, but certainly since COVID has hit us in March, there's an awful lot more information that I'm trying to absorb every day. I've got health messages coming from one side, I have messages coming from the school, then you have your workplace, then you have your family. So there's an awful lot coming at us, and I can't read too much anymore. So I have to limit myself and navigate around what am I going to do each day? Where am I going to go to find my information? How many times am I going to touch base with it? If I see something headline, am I sure that's correct? How am I going to then go and investigate that and sort of become a fact finder? And when I read something, then what am I bringing to the text as well? So there's an awful lot when you actually deconstruct and look at it. And we ran a very good training session with a group of adult literacy tutors and practitioners in Bray back in March. It was really just before everything happened, and we had a really interesting day around this whole topic. It was around media and digital literacy, and we were exploring some of these areas that we are trying to deal with ourselves, and then when we're working with our learners and our students, how are we trying to bring that to them as well? And so sort of trying to distill a piece in. My piece here is a bit practical. I'm trying to just bring sort of 4 top tips today. I have a slide on each of these, and then I think it really is an introductory today and an overview, because we could really drill in and have a session on each of these, and we are planning this. We'd like to hear from you too around what you'd like us to work on. But when we have the pack produced, as Tony mentioned earlier, the pack will be split into different sections. And we think in September, we're going to run maybe a 6-week webinar series where we'll be with you for 40 minutes every week to look at some of these topics in more detail. So the top tips really that we are looking at, number 1 is to press pause. So when you read that headline, just stop for a minute and just have a little moment to think about that. Then we move it into sort of thinking smartly. So again, I'll be looking in a minute just around questioning a little bit of what's there. Where did it come from? As Tony mentioned, the production, asking a little bit about our own bias that we bring to the story, and then what's missing. Then we just need to analyze it and just check, or maybe I need to go online now and check a few sources, go to a reputable website. How do I go about doing that? And then finally, just being clued in, or we may come up with another term, it's a working title there, but really trying to then conclude and decide yourself, do I agree with this? And if it is fact, do I like it? What are my values around that? And then am I going to share that, like that, or repeat that and tell that? And I suppose we've had a really interesting time dealing with a lot of the health messaging at the minute, and indeed politics can be quite interesting as well around hearing things and how do we respond to them. So taking those 4 and just have two interesting examples here. Back in March, people remember seeing this headline about using a hairdryer to breathe in hot air can cure COVID-19 and stop its spread. And there was an actual video that went with that. So that is absolutely misinformation. Somebody, it's incorrect, it has been disputed, but somebody went and made a video around that, put it out there and tried to put that out as being news and as being truth. The second piece there, again, more recently, we had the President, Trump, talking about perhaps using disinfectant to treat coronavirus. And I just took a screen grab there. I mean, even the language, it does a tremendous number on the lungs. I mean, you know, you sort of couldn't make this up in one sense. But when you read headlines like that, the really important thing is that we just stop and we press that pause button, and we just wait a minute and ask those 6 questions. You know, who, what, where, when, how, and why. And probably instinctively, we would do that ourselves as fluent readers. We would probably look at that and go, oh, that's rubbish, and we will move on. But a lot of our learners that we're working with and where people get their news, so this is another interesting piece that we will drill into in more detail in other webinars. You know, where do you get your news? And if you are getting your news from perhaps Facebook, and is that post real, or WhatsApp is a really interesting place people are getting news now. We do have to just be careful around what's coming in and how we are treating that. Then we have Thinking Smart. So I've read the title. I'm not sure, is it true? Those 2 examples are quite untrue. But if anyone like me, I read one at the very beginning saying that, you know, you drink a lot of water, that's good, you know, for yourself. And you're thinking, well, sure, drinking lots of water is good anyway. How is it good for COVID to protect you from COVID-19? So sometimes things are thrown out there and you're not sure, and you need to look and ask those questions. Where did that story come from, and how was it made? Then we look at our own bias. So when, again, something is there, well, what do I bring to that? You know, if it comes from a certain newspaper, or is there a certain angle, a person that I don't like? Well, I bring a bias to that and I go, I'm not listening to that. I don't agree with that because it's coming from that person. And to be aware of that, I think it's just important to have that self-awareness. And a really interesting thing, again, when you look, and we do this when we work with people in workshops, and if you're working with your students, when we get back to face-to-face learning, I think the really interesting question when you look at stuff is, what or who is missing from the story? And that's really, we do a lot of work when we do workshops. Tony brings in a load of newspapers and we look at stories. And it's really interesting when you take the same story across 4 newspapers and look at how they're covered in each paper, but then also who's missing or what's missing from that story. And they're very interesting questions. Sometimes life is busy and we don't have time to ask them, but I think when we're being asked to, you know, so the face masks will be a really interesting thing at the minute. So everyone's hearing slightly mixed messages, but, you know, ultimately there is a message to say we need to wear them when we're in supermarkets and when we're on public transport, but people aren't, and the combination then of what's stopping it and what's here, and maybe whose voice is missing from that piece as well, and just thinking about that. So then after we've gathered a bit of that, and we want to analyse then, and we want to check our sources. So if I read that in some particular newspaper online, is it a reputable paper, and what source do I trust when I read information? And again, Tony mentioned that good example there about, you know, a person who had put out a tweet genuinely thinking that the picture was correct, and it's not. So not everyone is trying to, you might trust that source, but they retweeted a picture that isn't true, but they didn't necessarily do it with malice. So again, just trying to have a look at that and gathering all the evidence. So is this fact? Is it an opinion? So again, the interesting piece about distinguishing between facts and opinion pieces. And again, newspapers are good for that, where you say to people, look, that's an opinion on the issue. It's not a factual piece. And then is it an out and outright lie? And that is another huge area. And there's an awful lot of myth busters going on at the minute. So this is a great one. The WHO, which is the World Health Organization, has actually created a page specifically for myth busting around coronavirus. And on the basis of the one I showed you earlier, the headline where the president had said maybe taking disinfectant could help, you know, straight away, and some Americans believed that, and other people around the world, so that's very worrying. So straight away we needed to counter that with actually factually, no, it does not protect you. So do not drink or take these substances. So again, I put the link down here when we will send you the presentation, or you can just Google World Health Organization Mythbusters, and you'll find a lot of, again, interesting things. People think we can catch coronavirus from mosquitoes, and people think garlic will protect you. So it actually has an awful lot of information trying to counteract information that's out there that is incorrect. And finally, then, are we clued in? So this is sort of the fourth piece then. So, you know, is this story, when I read it, you know, is this in line with my values? Was I comfortable reading that story? How did it speak to me? And, you know, even if it was true, fine, it mightn't be in line with my values. Well, am I going to like that story? And I'm thinking particularly on social media here. Will I share that story? Will I tell people about that? And of course, we're not seeing people as much as we did face to face, but we're still probably talking to people on phones. We're sharing WhatsApp messages, a pretty potentially disastrous way of information being passed on, that who's the person that's then researching and saying, actually, that tip that you sent me in WhatsApp was incorrect. It can be quite a challenge to come back on that to people. But really just trying to be aware of our own responsibility and to be responsible and to be kind. There is, if anyone is on Twitter in particular, or if anyone is, Facebook doesn't tend to be as cruel as Twitter can be, but you know, we have to just be careful and kind and responsible about what we're sharing. And if somebody you know has shared something, this happens a lot of the time, that is incorrect, happened to me, it's like it's not correct, you know, calling them out on Facebook and telling them underneath that you're wrong isn't even the way to go probably either for relations. So picking up the phone, having a chat to them, saying, look, I see that thing you put out there, I'm not really sure is that true. I looked up that and I think I found that there's a different opinion on that there. So again, comfortably trying to challenge people if things are grossly inaccurate. So all of those 4 tips, I hope are useful. And then sort of leading into just looking around, how would you introduce media literacy and the digital world, I suppose, to your students? This is probably easier done when you're in a group situation and we're looking at each other face to face, but which we hopefully will be back in the autumn time. But some three questions to sort of get started and get thinking around this. So one would be, you know, where did you get your news today? So if we'd longer time here, we probably would do some polls with you, or if we were together, we'd all be chatting. So we'd ask you today, where did you get your news? So this morning, did you open them or buy a newspaper? Did you look up your news online? Did you get it from the radio? Did you watch some television? Social media, you know, I get some of my news by Twitter, time consuming. I'm like, oh, look, there's a couple of the RT website, the journal.ie, great. Or did I even get my news from someone that I know? So the word of mouth thing as well is important. And then after you think, well, I got my news today, did I believe everything I heard today? You know, did I think that was really, did I doubt anything? And then if I did doubt something, did I go, and invariably there are digital skills, and this is where it comes in. How could I check if that was correct or not? And again, us people who are probably easier access to it will probably just fly on and try and check that out somewhere. But then you're typing something into Google that's unbelievable amount of answers can come back. So there's more time consuming around checking out if that's true. And again, if I'm not sure something's true anymore, I've stopped liking a lot of information, and I certainly don't share as much because I don't have time to go check whether what I'm sharing is correct. But again, just being very conscious before you decide, you know, am I going to like that, share that, or tell other people that it's absolute fact when maybe it isn't fact. I just heard it somewhere and I'm repeating it. So I think these could be sort of 3 introductory pieces. You could run a day on each of these really, but I suppose I'm just trying to think of 3 questions to maybe get that conversation going if you were running a class or doing some communications work with some students and learners. And finally then, just I suppose we summarize the whole piece into some tips today, which we looked at the press, pause, the think smart, and the analyze and evaluate, and then being responsible and kind. And what we have done then is we have under the handout section there, I hope you will see on the control panel that Fergus showed you, we have a list of further resources which you can either download today or we will email it to you. And we will also send you some, which has some of these resources here LinkedIn, and Tony works with 80/20, and that's a very good toolkit there. The first link is excellent. There's some good resources. The Be Media Smart campaign, which again is an Irish-based campaign with Media Literacy Ireland. That is some really interesting stuff there again. Webwise is great. Anyone with kids, onto Webwise to look at some of the suggestions. And under the critical thinking link there, they've some great questions to ask. And then I like the journal.ie have some good fact check pieces there. So again, some of the more absurd and not absurd information, they will go fact check it for you. Us is the only fact check unit in Ireland, and that's very useful. So our details are here, and we're going to email everybody with the slides, which you can use in your learning environment. We'll email you the resources list that, as I said, is down there, and a little evaluation. But we'd love to hear from you now and get some questions or comments around this whole topic, because it's a great area, but we're really only just sort of skimming it today to give you an introduction. So thanks, Fergus.
Great. Thanks very much, Helen and Tony. That was really thought-provoking, and there's lots of food for thought, and to maybe pause a little bit and to think about how we could do we or do not want to share information or pass it on or discuss. So there's plenty there that can be done in the class. As I said, if you want to now ask some questions, you can either click on the hand signal beside your name, or else type in the questions. So I'm just having a look here. So far, okay, so far everyone's saying this is a great presentation, but I see a question here from Grania saying, okay, is this webinar available afterwards? Yes, Grania, we're recording this webinar, and it will be, by this time tomorrow roughly, it'll be on the NALA Ireland YouTube channel. So that's the NALA Ireland YouTube channel. I'm just looking down.
Fergus, would you mind if I just made a comment, just based on what we've covered and the ongoing discussions that we're having on making the world, the complex, chaotic information world around us, more accessible. Sometimes it feels like it's an ocean out there, and it is. And what we're trying to do is to find your way in, get your example and put it under the lens and test it out. So it's an invitation to grapple with it in a way that isn't the whole elephant. It's just a piece, it's a chunk. So take a tweet, take one post, take a poster, and the poster can be from a company, it can be from a political campaign, it could be from something that you encounter on the way into, that learners will have encountered. It can be an object, and so on. So this is about opening ourselves up to the process. Something I didn't say while we were doing our introduction was that is that the number of false or misleading tweets that are put out from the East Coast of America surpassed 10,000. The Washington Post saw that within 100 days of the first term of the president, and they were being able to not expect everybody to take on the 10,000 tweets is important. But what about which one are you going to select and test out and query and pause, as Helen has said, is very important. So it's developing a sense to engage. A second thing I wanted to comment on is that in all stories, there's a kernel of truth, and it's important to find what is the core of a story that is out there that you may be encountering or reading, and reflecting on that is important. So agreeing it, discussing it, and inviting people to figure that out, because it stands up on certain assumptions. And what are those assumptions? So again, this is a tool to be able to navigate it. The last thing I'll say is that the kernel of truth is part of understanding that institutions like broadcast media are responsible for the production of news. So when we think of the kind of society we want to build, the kind of democratic place that we would like to encourage and flourish, it means that we can't live in disbelief of all institutions. At the moment, considering global politics, people trust and have faith in certain institutions, like the health service, for example. And being able to defend those and trust them is important, but also being critical is okay. But that doesn't mean you flush away all broadcast media because they're all a bunch of liars. So being able to defend and argue for certain media is important. And I'm just saying that out loud. when we know the critical side of engaging on tweets and this newspaper has said and so on can be quite negatively framed. But actually it's important for preparedness as educators and tutors on this agenda, we need to trust and have faith in certain parts of our system that makes up, that holds it together in terms of information. Because if all information if we can't believe any of it, then how will we ever believe anything? So it's all about this evidence base and science and reasoning and so on. So it comes from that idea, really. And just a reminder to ourselves that it's okay that they can get it wrong, but it's the main story actually that's important. Sorry, Fergus, you were worried about, were there any other questions coming through or comments or anything else?
Yeah, thanks, Tony, for that. Yeah, so some questions now coming through. So a lot of comments saying they love the presentation. I'm going to mainly read out the questions then. So one from Angela saying, how do you get around being polite and acknowledging the information sent without agreeing with it?
Yes, it's a skill in itself, isn't it? That's not even working with our and I suppose she's probably particularly thinking that if that comes in a WhatsApp group, it can be a particular challenge. There was a great article by a journalist at the beginning about the first month into the whole COVID environment, where a journalist said that she was on the family WhatsApp group and she would come home after doing her day's journalist work, checking facts, and somebody in the family WhatsApp group was after putting something that was incorrect. And her patience was waning with trying to go back and being polite to people. And she was nearly feeling just going, you're wrong. I've been working on this all day. I'm tired. This is the answer. It is very, it is very hard, particularly if it's in writing. I think when we're Irish people, we love the chat, and when we're in a cafe or in a setting, it's much easier to probably challenge somebody, I find, on it. Are you sure that's true? Oh, where did you read about that? So and in a classroom setting, that can be quite interesting. Tony and myself, we would have spoke about that with the grade tutors that time, around how you can chip in on a point that someone makes, and then everyone becomes nearly a detective and an investigator. You know, we would have heard some of the ridiculous commentary stuff about people who you know, who are coming in from the country here, who are immigrating into Ireland, and everyone gets X and Y, and we go, really? Let's look that up. How you do it on a piece of information, which is what Angela's asking there, is actually, yes, it is very challenging, because anything you write in is it written, it's an evidence base, it's how do you do it. So I suppose what I would do is I would go back and just say, oh, that's very interesting. Where did you read that? What newspaper? Where's your source? So, you know, questioning them. Now, if they send a link back to the article and it comes from, we name it, the Daily Mail or one of those mad newspapers where you really would question what comes, you know, then you're going back, oh, right, I'm not sure. And you could gently approach, assuming we don't want an all-out family row if it's a particular WhatsApp. So it is challenging, but I would comfortably question, and certainly, or I also saw something recently which I thought was really good. Somebody put back into a group, I don't agree with that, full stop. So at least you feel, well, I've said it, I've named my opinion on it, other people, and here's why, if you can, and send a link. And then you'll have done your job in giving factual counteraction, if you like, to that. But it isn't easy. None of this is easy, because we live in a world with a lot of information that is hard to disprove and prove.
If I can just add to your comments, Helen, I'd have two very, very brief responses. The first is that in a learning context is very different to in a kind of a channel like WhatsApp. And in the learning context, we've certainly encouraged building a practice of critical engagement over time. So, for example, something we've mentioned, and Helen's included on the notes, is on the resources, is that every day the journal.ie publish the 9 at 9. And that's the 9 major stories across a range of issues of the day. So if you were to ask critical questions of what's going on, who's saying what, how's it framed, what's going on, is it exaggerated, and so on and so forth, there's a good testing ground to explore the practice in a way that's kind of removed. The class is kind of is an outlet for testing out and engaging with things. So bring stuff in for the group to grapple with. That would be that would be certainly something we're encouraging. The second is that in a WhatsApp context or the private context is it's difficult when things are so polarizing and so polarized in how they're framed. So being able to try and take the heat out of it, to ask what's going on, or is that really what's going on, you know, is important. So encouraging a practice of, or for someone else to just engage with it, inviting them to engage with it, may be more progressive, or it may change how they engage with it, sooner than just saying, I don't agree, it's completely wrong, you know, because then it just seems like you're taking a strong position rather than trying to go exploring it with them. Sorry, that's just what I wanted to say. Fergus, yep.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, thanks. Okay, Anne-Marie Mahan's asking, how can we access the PowerPoint? So I will email it on to everybody who registered. Helen will send it to me after, and I'll email it on. And also you'll be able to see this, a video of this webinar on the NALA Ireland YouTube channel, Anne-Marie, as well. That'll be up by tomorrow. Okay, Clodagh Lynham, thanks Clodagh, has sent a tip. She said, I think you pronounce it Snopes or Snoops. snopes.com is a good fact-checking site too. snopes.com. Good, yeah. Thanks, Clodagh. Okay, Liesl has a question for you, and it's kind of continuation maybe of what you've just been talking about, the two of you. If a Facebook friend posts something that you disagree with, do you A, delete the friend, B, ignore the comment, or C, engage with the person?
It sounds like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Which one will I go with? Well, sometimes you do, you can do all of them. So I had that experience recently around somebody posted something around the conspiracy of coronavirus was created and all of this thing. So I chose in that circumstance, I wasn't going to engage with, it just wasn't the right time to start having a row with anyone, be it on, certainly not on Facebook. So I just left that. And if it comes up in conversation again, we may have a chat about it. And it's, so I just left it. But yeah, I mean, again, I've had other things that come up where I know people mightn't have intentionally put that up, and I have gone back. But I don't really like doing it on Facebook or on Twitter. I just think they can become, it, like Tony said, it puts more heat into it. So I would nearly prefer to just pick up the phone to someone and have a chat, or if I see them for a coffee or something, we'd have a chat. Oh, that's interesting what you were saying about that. Where is that coming from? How have you formed that opinion? What source was that? So again, trying to question softly, nicely, and yeah, I haven't yet deleted anyone on it, but option A is interesting. I'll keep it in my ask the audience if I need it.
Okay, Tony, have you anything to add there?
I think it presents kind of a common challenge. I don't think I'd add much more than what Helen has said. I mean, I can see how being prepared to respond is taking on someone, but maybe having something like what Clodagh suggests, there's a range of fact checkers out there, and maybe posting a link to something like that. Snopes is a treasure trove of material. The journal.ie's fact check unit is really good on topical issues when they're occurring. So knowing a few spots to go to check information is good, and they're good for on these kinds of issues. So my suggestion would be just fire one of them in there, and just, you know, for the basis of moving it, because the silence can chase you as well. You know, you might feel uneasy about it, and you have feelings about it as well. So rather than just, you know, avoiding that uncle until the next family reception, and then keeping your head down there as well, maybe that's a better space to open it out. But also, you have to be selective in how you engage with it, because if it is someone you know, it's quite different to someone you don't know when you're faced with that, because the ignore question is much easier when it's faced with a public format and forum, and you can block or delete or just ignore. But someone you know is quite different. And actually, I see it as an opportunity to invite them to engage with it a little bit differently. So not going to say call them out, but say, oh, did you know this? Or look, I found this. I said, oh, I wasn't sure about that, but here's something, you know. So encouraging a journey may actually be one that you're willing to assist them on or explore with them. But anyway, that would be my optimism on it. You can say some people aren't worth talking to or will never change their mind, but I don't know. Have faith. People can change positions and minds, and it is about perseverance as well. So, you know, the question is, are you exposing them to other kinds of areas of learning, or are they just going to receive the things that are in their feeds or the things they encounter to develop their positions? Because they may just be recycling talking points from somewhere else. So you may actually be doing a service by presenting them with something that they would never have seen before. So there is that side to it as well.
Okay, thanks. Brian Donnelly has sent in a suggestion or a tip saying WebWise provide an excellent service and resource. That's WebWise. Okay, there's a comment here from Grania saying, I was told years ago in community development circles to always ask yourself, say in a meeting or a gathering of people, why is everyone here? What is each person's agenda? I suppose the same with media articles. What's the agenda of the sponsoring organization? So, good point, Grania. Okay, let me see else. Joan is asking, are people finding that learners are using newspapers less and believing social media platforms more? It's difficult to challenge someone's friend told them on Facebook or WhatsApp. So,
yeah, that came up actually at our workshop, and it came up again. We did a tutors workshop, Fergus, at the tutors forum, and that came up. But I suppose this is what and adult literacy tutors and community education practitioners are great at. We're sort of great at doing this on other topics, and some of the stuff that Tony mentioned there's quite politicized at the minute. You know, we've got elections in America, we've had our own elections here, we've different things. I suppose so you're becoming a sort of a facilitator of questioning, and I think it's important to. And again, as we were talking about this, when someone says that, God, that's really interesting. So you don't really, we never put anyone down, which no one would ever do that in an adult literacy or an adult education world. So you're right, okay, that's very interesting. Right, let's explore that a little bit. So first of all, has anyone else in the group got an opinion on it? Okay, we hopefully sharing it in a nice way. And then if we have access to technology, because again, and if the group is at that point where they're using digital, Tony does an exercise in the group where he gets everyone to take out their smartphone or they share a smartphone, and we try and break that myth. So we will look at stuff and say to them, look up there and see, does a hot whiskey cure a cold? Just as a, and we'd all have a look and find that out. So again, trying to get the learners and the students themselves to question it. So really, you're the facilitator. You are none of us are experts. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a political analyst. I have an opinion on everything, and I probably have an opinion on, nothing either. So nothing's right. Like we would argue constantly ourselves, even in the office, on opinions on different things in a nice, respectful way. And I suppose your role as a teacher and a tutor is to try and just facilitate that discussion, which is, I suppose, made much easier when we see each other face to face. I know topics can become a bit hairy and tension, but it's even more challenging now if you're doing probably webinars, or if you are, I know some students are having Zoom calls, so I suppose that is another challenge. But please continue that type of questioning and inviting people to be an investigator and find the truth. I suppose maybe that's it, and as Tony said, there's a kernel there somewhere, and find that.
Okay, kind of following on from your comment, Helen, Patrick has asked both of you, are there any no-go areas or no-go topics for you?
Well, I suppose I'm not a tutor, so it's at the minute, so it is a really interesting. There can't be a no-go topic, probably because you cannot dictate what a learner will bring in with them. We ran an interesting workshop, Fergus, about 2 years ago around, remember, how to deal with difficult topics. Yeah. We were packed out at the tutors forum, and that was fascinating. And we looked at that, and there are actually, if people are interested, I have a sheet on that. We produced a sheet around some tools. We did a piece of work with the WIT on this, because there can be some really hard topics that come up, and they have come up, and we have some tools around where you have to stop the class possibly if that has happened, and you have to say, right, when I mean stop the class, you say, okay, it's time for a cup of tea now, and you break it, and that's it. So I don't think there's a no-go topic, because you can't really dictate it, and I suppose it's about you as a tutor having a toolbox and a few tools, and I'm happy to add that sheet in to the email we'll send around, because I think that's, Tony, unless you've anything experience of no-go topics.
No, I mean, just to reaffirm what you're saying, Helen, that there's a lot of stuff out there, lots of toolkits and trigger sheets and assistive aids for tutors around controversial issues. I think that being open to teachable moments is kind of what this topic is all about. And the teachable moments this week may be different from next week. And we know that based on Black Lives Matter in the US and how National Radio in Ireland has responded, young people have responded, adults have responded, and stories that are coming from it. So last week and this week on that context is very clear to me. That's a you know, you have an opportunity. It's almost like the Joe Duffy show, so who's talking to Joe and what's going on. Again, it's about developing a sense of testing, questioning, and bringing it in so that you can engage different topics as you go. But no, I wouldn't say that there's any no go-to areas. You'll find things come up and appear on the plate, and you will have a moment to engage with it, or else it's lost and somebody goes somewhere else for it and they lose the chance to, they may be looking for help on it and it may come in this way. So I think it's about developing a sense of your antennae to be able to process it in a way that is educationally sound, because there's lots of examples. I would even say to you that there's a link I will include that's going to go with the stuff that's going around from a session from the Poynter Institute in the US, who look at how fake news has been tackled globally, looking at country by country different strategies. It's like anti-misinformation approaches, and it's a map and it shows law, procedure, journalists, education programs, and so on. So just a sense of, well, what's going on out there on these issues is good to see, because it isn't about dealing with it alone. I would say it's actually about communities of practice, talking with other educators about it, talking about it. You're developing a sense collectively is important so that you don't shoulder it alone. And that's all I would say to it, because you don't have to.
Okay, thank you. Sharona Ferguson has a question. Are there any websites or sources where the news is fact-based and not opinions or misleading? We wouldn't have the time to fact check each news article. Thank you for an excellent webinar.
Yeah, so the best one, Tony, the one that we like at the minute is the journal.ie at 9 at 9. So at 9 in the morning, and again, we have that on the list here. That lovely, see the handout sheet again, it's just down here, but we will be emailing it to you. And that's facts, because that's news. And again, websites like RTE.ie, you can also maybe look at, if it's health related, I will be going straight to the HSE.ie on coronavirus, the WHO, the World Health Organization, again on if it's coronavirus or vaccines or whatever. So really trusted news sources. You're going to, and then when you're in, for example, the Irish Times will be a trusted, or the Guardian, but then there are opinion articles within those websites. So just to be aware that sometimes there is, to not confuse. I know we mightn't, but perhaps a student could be on and there's so much that, oh my God, I read this. Well, actually, that was an opinion on something. Because again, I suppose it's quite interesting around statistics will drive you up the wall and down the wall again. But like, one statistic can mean something to me. Fergus will have a different opinion and Tony will have another interpretation. So with one statistic, the three of us could write 3 different articles or have 3 different opinions on it. So again, that's a real interesting angle that's why, Tony, there's a great exercise that it does, and we'd recommend it to do it with learners, would be to buy the newspapers of the day when you're all back in class again. And if you buy the 4 or 5 newspapers of the day, look for the same article, but how it's reported in each of the papers. And again, hopefully there's fact within it, but yes, indeed, there can be, some newspapers will hone in on certain elements more than others.
If I can just add to your comments, Helen, about websites that was put to us. Snopes, as we've mentioned, is a good one. It's US based. Africa Check is one that's based on the continent of Africa. Where do we get information from? Being aware that we're all Irish and UK mostly led resources, and being self-aware of that means somewhere like Africa Check, which has loads of really, really useful education-friendly materials on how to go and do that kind of work, is there. And there's regional ones too. So what we can do is we can put together the list of there's also
conversation.com has just been typed in by Grania. Said the
Yeah.
conversation is a good research and
Conversation.
evidence-based articles, UK-based, I think. Thatconversation.com.
Okay.
So yeah, they're great. That's mostly academics, if I'm not mistaken. In an academic context, they write to it, but you'll find there's loads of stuff on these specific issues there. The New York Times have some great free downloads as well. There's another website called Teaching Tolerance, and that's a US-based teachers, post-primary teachers context, but the stuff can be adapted very, very easily. But again, that's kind of a teaching portal rather than necessarily news, which is what the question was. The journal.ie's fact check unit is a great testing ground for it too. And there's equivalents of that unit. Some organizations in the world exist only to do that particular job. And there's a UK-based one, I think, is it Fact Find? There's a Northern Ireland-based one, which looks at sectarianism issues in particular, amongst others in Northern Ireland. But we can send a long list because the journal.ie have one page with a number of websites that are all fact check units that are certified through the Poynter Institute, basically the network that fact check units are associated with. So they're listed together, and we can send that round. So you can just play with it, have a look, and you can be sure that they subscribe to a certain code and practice.
Yeah. And the journal.ie, for example, as well, Tony, could be interesting, will actually take a question from the public. So if you're having a lovely big conversation and it's a big row and this is that, and I know that's true, you could actually say, do you know what, as a little experiment now, why don't we email into the journal.ie and let's ask them, is that true? And if it doesn't happen in 24 hours, sometimes it can take them a week to go and do it, but they will go and answer some questions. So that might be a nice thing for as a learner exercise with your group as well.
Okay, just a quick question for Tony and Helen. It's 3 o'clock now. We've quite a few more questions. Are you two okay for staying on? And
yeah,
we still got 73 people.
Problem. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, no, if people are interested, we're happy to go. Yep.
Pam, I'm going to unmute you. I hope you're ready for this. Pam has got a kind of tip, and because I've unmuted you, Pam. Could you read out and just explain what you're talking about there, please?
Sure. I recently got a link to getbadnews.com. Have you used it? Yeah, great. So I just think it's fantastic. It's a game where you go on and you're trying to get as many followers, as far as I remember, as possible by putting out fake news, malinformation, disinformation. So it kind of does, it's exciting while at the same time really teaching you in a fun way what it's like to be someone who is putting out news just to get followers.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say I tried it and I thought it was very much worth trying anyway.
So that's getbadnews.com /hashtag intro. Okay, thanks, Pam. I'll just mute again in case the dog runs in.
That's really good. Yeah, no, it's a great teaching tool, but again, it's about the practice of deconstruction, to reconstruct, and also to observe, to see that is what is going on. That's part of the point about learning how these things are done, that you have in a way that is bite-sized rather than difficult to get at. So yeah, that's a great, it's a very popular tool that definitely encourage it. Yeah.
Okay, Cian O'Tierney saying, at Dublin Airport are good tweeting brutal but fair responses. Okay, thanks, Cian. Angela saying, thanks for your answers.
Just Cian's point there, Fergus, is interesting that certain institutions can have a voice like that, like the airport itself, and it's both entertaining but also very informative. And it's a, you know, that as a tool or as a way of understanding it. Comedy, you know, I don't know, like social commentary comedy that, you know, is activist comedy, you know, there's all of those kinds of things are very, very, very good to check out and get people to, you know, you could follow a bunch of those and both be entertained but also see how things can get interrogated. So, and you know, it's
Or the Twitter account of the COVID virus, one of them was Connell's Chain. So from normal people, everybody, there was a Twitter that was set up just based on his, but isn't it interesting? I mean, whoever knew that something like that could just take off. So it's, yeah, but the social commentary piece is interesting on some of the websites as well.
Okay, we've got a tip here from Rachel saying, ignore Facebook, it's too volatile.
Yeah.
Let me see, what else have we?
I know someone who says they're not on Facebook because Facebook is evil.
Okay.
It's an emotional thing as well. Yeah.
There's the bias.
Monica is saying snooze for 30 days option on Facebook is handy option too. Hadn't heard about that. Snooze for 30 days. Okay. Brian is agreeing kind of with what the two of you have been saying. Important to remind tutors working with adults on the issues of fact checking. Deirdre says, like the suggestion of taking a tweet or poster and building an integrated lesson around it. Thanks. Okay. Patrick is getting back to us. He was the guy who asked, is there any no-go topic or no-go area? So he wants to keep this going. He's saying, what about fact checking the Bible with a class of evangelical Christians? Okay. Go on, Patrick. Okay.
Nice, easy one, Patrick. Thanks for that.
Yeah. You get through that quickly.
Yeah.
Brian,
Where do we start with that? But the capacity to open up a discussion is there. But when you say fact checking, are we going to Rome to check the to check the scripture? And I mean, there's people who spend time looking into the archives to develop that historical sense of it as well. So maybe cross-reference some of the academic stuff that has been asserted in recent years. That would be one potential way of doing it. I'm not going to say it's off topic, but certainly dealing with the question out loud is good, because I suspect some of the solutions might be fired at us in the comments as well as we're beginning to talk about it.
I think that's come up before. Do you remember Pauline Hensey, Fergus spoke about this at her, we had a critical thinking seminar, and she spoke about, the religion can come in. And again, I mean, I suppose it's around looking, there's really an amazing amount of useful TED Talks out there as well, and expert people or different opinions, not everyone's an expert, but I think so again, trying to bring some level of not moderation, but trying to put opinions and actually two different opinions across, and even getting guests in from the outside, so you can say, look, this is really interesting, so next week I'm going to look at trying to get someone in. Would people be interested in getting somebody who has experience in X, Y, and Z, and we get them in to talk, because nothing should really be like, it's learning, lifelong learning. We should be able to embrace and respectfully discuss topics and all leave the room having a different opinion based on some factual basis, we hope.
Okay, there's a good point here from Brian saying free and available image editing software makes it very easy to manipulate images on phones and mobile devices. It's easy to see how viewers can be misled. Very true, Brian, thanks. Let me see what else we have.
Both in Finland and, if I'm not mistaken, was it Colombia or Brazil, that around elections, that they commissioned people to produce fake political ads and circulated them, but they did them in a way that people were really attracted to looking at them, so people understood the potential of that to mislead, in order to then be critical about the stuff that wasn't, but still to develop that awareness. So bring that in and show it how it's done. There's great videos online to show you how the media manipulation stuff happens. Even the classic Photoshop version of the front cover of a beauty magazine, and you get to see how somebody gets photoshopped to be pristine and perfect and without wrinkles. I say pristine and perfect according to the editors and whatever standard they decided to apply. But again, the production's exposing people to how it's made, and the production end means that they can practice it to know how to sense or to spot it again, rather than staying away from it. Bring it in,
Yeah. And we recommend, there's a good film, it's on the sheet, that's the handout if you downloaded it, and it'll be on the same sheet I will email. It's called After Truth, Disinformation and the Cost of Fake News. So it's available, it's a HBO film, it's online at the minute. I have the link there. It's about 90 minutes. But again, some fascinating stuff, Tony, in that around doctoring information, making up stuff, how they put it out there, particularly in the US elections. So that's After Truth is the film, but we will give you the link in the resources sheet. Might be worth a watch, and even for your students over the summer, you're saying, look, if you want to, we'll be delving a bit more into this, finding facts or whatever, you could suggest it for them to have a look at.
Okay, thanks, Helen. There's a comment here from Justine. It's kind of follow on from what you've said. When media is owned and sponsored by corporations, particularly in the USA, where do we find non-biased news outlets? I'm conscious that mainstream media can manipulate what we see. Is there a term news outlets use to let us know they are non-biased?
Yeah,
There's a nice
is there a
question.
term?
That's a
Not really.
hard one.
It's you know, that is a fact checking. I mean, it's the nearest, Tony, wouldn't it be, where again you would, you know, a newspaper does report on things, and absolutely, look, there can be slight slants on the way facts are presented. We mentioned that example about 4 newspapers. Each of them will take the information and possibly deliver it in different ways. So there's a difference between, I suppose, the fact, is that an utter lie, and that's okay, that's wrong, and then taking a report and then people sort of reporting on that. So there's nothing that sort of says this is a really good quality mark. People are sort of they would say they would you know, all of the newspapers would say they were valid and they were correct and they would fact check, but they do get things wrong. I mean, if you look at the corrections piece on some of the newspapers, sometimes journalists are busy, they take something that's said, there's a journalism is another term. I know we have that in the guide, and we will possibly look at that, but that's where, you know, loads of NGOs and loads of politicians and all people send out press releases every minute of every day. And does the journalists believe everything that comes in their fax or their email now? They shouldn't, because what it is spin. So that's something. So we've got an hour and 10 minutes in and we haven't mentioned the word spin. But you know, that's another whole angle to news. So we take it and we spin it in a way that suits us. So there's an awful lot really in that. But no, in answer to your question, sorry, I don't mean to diverge, is that there's no actual, here's the quality mark that says everything I say, because who would police that and who's the master of it? So I suppose the integrity is of the institution themselves.
Yeah.
And in a US context, there isn't the same kind of press complaints commission like you would find in terms of regulation that goes on here and in the UK. So it is problematic when we know that information is not bound by borders. It does cross over and we are exposed to it. And what kind of, I don't know what term am I going to think of now, there's an infodemic going on with the kinds of things that are getting put out. That's a phrase that has been used now to describe how much of this stuff is in the bloodstream of information online. But you know, what kind of educational sunscreen are we going to put on in that context to be able to resist it and build up a resistance, but also to see it? I think that the question of what is not biased or how could anything not carry bias is important to remember. Journalists don't always write themselves into the story of how they got information that you might find a white man is going and looking at issues related to women and women's lives. And actually, if a female journalist had done it, the outcome may be different. We find that certain cartoonists and graphic novel writers and illustrators end up writing themselves into the stories that they draw because they are encountering it from their perspectives. So how could something not carry some form of bias is an important admission, but the question is to what degree and how much does that impact on things like the measurement and the fact, you know? So I'm saying that because, you know, if you say The Guardian in the UK, the newspaper, or the Irish Times, or the Journal.ie, or the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, Fox News, I'm going like this. Now, where's one that's right down the middle, you know? And asking what is it contributing? So you'll find different sections in papers and sources have different leanings on them, and that might be just to do with who owns them, the idea of sponsorship, and the commercial end is important. Some believe in nothing except one thing, the green stuff, you know. So if they believe in money, then if profits seem to be the guiding stick for what they're seeking to do, is integrity in some way subjected to being undermined and eroded? These are important questions because again, in the exercises we did looking at newspapers, we said, well, who funds them and what do we know about them? So again, it's a journey in exploring some of that with learners, if you would like. They could take something in and you can put it under the lens and the test. But even still, knowing the very fact that, you know, what is bias? how is it made and how is it constructed and what can we do about that is important, because every one of us carries some form of bias, whether we like it or not. So being self-aware of different kinds is helpful, because it means that, you know, I'm a white man with a beard, and that means something in particular, depending on where I am and how I see things and how I end up writing or speaking about things. It may have an impression on that. So that's inescapable. I mean, I'm not sure if that's helpful to do, but I'm not saying that there is no bias. I'm saying that there actually is, and what kinds are there. And again, testing that out and putting it under the microscope is important, or the lens, as an educator, because we would all carry it. And very often we're trying to throw those experiences in to inform some of the work and to energize it as well. So that's my quick response.
Okay, thanks, Tony. There are quite a few comments, Helen and Tony, saying great webinar, they loved it. So I'm not going to read those out because this is the last question. So there's kind of two questions from Anne-Marie Mahan here. Helen, you might take the first one. Very helpful. Thanks so much, and look forward to more discussion in September. How can we access the 6-week program in September?
Okay, so what Tony and myself from NALA and 80/20 have been working on together, as I said, for about a year, delivered some workshops. We're writing the guide. And what we hope to do in September is going to be exactly what Fergus sent already. So we will be opening it up to the email that's sent out. The first 100 and so odd people will get their link. We will run the each week, probably, as I say, clued in at noon or whatever we'll do. We'll run them. We will record them. We will put them all up on the YouTube channel. So it's not a problem. If people do miss them, please don't worry. We will have them up there. And I suppose then we're going to try and get some of your feedback to see what, you know, we could run a year-long course on this. There's so much in it. So we've been quite selective today, even with just trying to give you an introductory to it. And in the 6 weeks we'll do as well. So we'd like to hear from you. So you can email us. Myself and Tony's emails will be at the end of the presentations there. If there's a particular topic you really want. And then again, if we're hearing feedback that this topic really needs a bit more from a tutor learning perspective to get ready for teaching it, we'll run, like if everyone has watched those 6 weeks, either live or through the YouTube channel, maybe in October we'll just have a seminar where we can all chat to each other. Now it would be, Fergus will be moderating hands up and people, we can see people on the screen, but you know, we might need to do that. We don't know where we're going to be. We don't know when our next face-to-face event is going to happen. So we're going with this sort of structure at the minute. And, you know, we hope that we're giving you something today that's relevant and useful. And look, you can certainly access them, as I say. Sorry, it's a long-winded way of saying same way and on the YouTube channel. But we're learning and we want to hear from you, I suppose, is the main point I'm trying to say.
Okay, and just a short answer for this one. Anne-Marie's asking, is critical thinking taught in schools at primary or secondary level?
Tony, you want to go or do you want me?
It's where do we start? Helen, you go for it. Yeah, I'll let you roll in. Yeah.
It's meant to be, I suppose, isn't that? And it is. I mean, teachers and I would say, of course, we teach it. And they do. I mean, I have an 8-year-old at the minute that's been looking at persuasive writing, and she's being asked to critically look at certain things. That's what the school does. Obviously, then parents, there's a role. We've been thrown into being home learners at the minute. But, you know, so I think it's really important that everyone is asking kids to question things. And, you know, what really does give me hope is the amount of young people, and I'm talking teens now, that have come out, particularly around the climate issue. So I think people are becoming, and they are critical, and, you know, critical thinkers, critical questioners. What they need to be met with, and what we all need to be met with, is a respectful hearing. And we need to then come to some agreements with each other. You know, I won't get everything I want, fine, but I want to see some movement on X, Y, and Z. So I do hope they are. And if you feel they're not, and if you have, you know, children within the system, you know, it's a great conversation to ask the teacher and ask the school and your ethos. Are you bringing this up and teaching it within the classroom?
Okay, thanks. Anything to add there, Tony?
Yeah, very, very, very quickly, building on what Helen has said, there's a number of key areas that have critical thinking that are quite obvious in some subjects to lots of us, like in English. There's a very particular strand in terms of media literacy that's included, and engaging narratives and text and so on. But what the important broader point is that there's ongoing reform of education itself to not be as reliant on exam-based assessment alone. And that is opening up spaces to be more critical in group work and individual project-based and so on. So the blend is important to prove, to show us that actually criticality isn't just about the projects and so on, but it's more, it can be more visible. So the curriculum reform is an ongoing thing, and it is being encountered, and it is being introduced in lots of ways. And the realities around us in the world challenge that. So the introduction of politics and society at secondary level happened after the crash. So we had, at that point in time, we had civics education for junior cycle, we had transition year, but there was no follow-on in terms of engaging with the debates and the political moment and the decision making that went on in a kind of a civics context for what was at a very critical end of the teenage years. So that has changed. So I do have hope in terms of, you know, the introduction of changes in time and adapting to the needs of to be more critical. It does exist. It's taken time to get there, you know, and I'm not going to say it's perfect either, but those spaces do exist, and they've been hard fought for as well. Away from, I mean, for those of us that are in adult education know Paulo Freire and the Freirean sense of education, banking versus other, you know, and being able to open up a dialogue is important, and that's, those spaces are being opened up more and more in primary and post-primary. Yep.
Okay, thanks, Tony. We're going to leave it there because it's about 3:20, I think. And the last few comments are all thanks very much. Excellent webinar. People have enjoyed it. I'd just like to thank Helen and Tony for a really insightful and thought-provoking and, you know, ideas webinar. I see from the comments and from the people who've stayed on that it's really gone down well. So thanks very much, Helen and Tony. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got some ideas, some things to mull over and think about for your classes. There's people still typing in Gurumina Mahagat and many thanks and all that kind of thing. So thanks everyone. We'll leave it there. Helen and Tony, I'll talk to you after. I'll close this down now. So thanks again, and all the best.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Fergus. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, Fergus. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.